My name is Karen Whitmore. I am 68 years old, a widow, and for most of my life I worked as a community librarian in Portland, Oregon. People think librarians live quietly among shelves and paper, but let me tell you, sometimes silence is the sharpest place to witness cruelty. I learned that on the eve of my daughter's wedding, when a single smirk cut deeper than any knife. The villa glittered that night. Chandeliers blazed above tables dressed in white silk, crystal glasses caught the glow, and musicians tuned their strings while staff hurried through the marble halls. It should have been a night of joy. My daughter Lily walked beside me, her hands clasped, her face pale from the weight of what tomorrow meant. She had chosen a man who promised her stability, ambition, and a family legacy she thought she needed. His name was Victor Haldane. Victor walked into the hall as if it were a stage built only for him. His tuxedo was tailored within an inch of perfection, his hair slicked back like a Wall Street mogul, his smile polished for the photographers he imagined would soon adore him. When his eyes met mine, something tightened in my chest. I wanted to believe we could share one simple evening in peace. But then he leaned closer, lips curling, and whispered words that froze me in place. "The perfect wedding gift," he said, his voice low enough that only I and Lily heard, "would be your absence." Lily's hand trembled in mine. She looked down, unable to meet my eyes. Victor straightened, his smirk spreading wider, as though he had just toasted to his own victory. Around us, laughter and chatter filled the air, unaware that one sentence had already shifted the ground beneath my feet. I stood very still, my heart hammering against my ribs. In the pocket of my dress, my fingers closed around the cool metal of a silver key. It was small, unremarkable to anyone else, but it had belonged to my late husband, Richard. He'd given it to me the day we signed the papers for this villa, reminding me that I held a part of our future. That key was more than metal. It was a promise. Victor thought he was clever. He thought I would bow my head, fade into the shadows like an aging woman out of place in the glow of youth. I forced my lips into what must have looked like a polite smile, but in my chest, a storm began to gather. His insult was meant to humiliate, but all it did was awaken something I had buried for years, the knowledge that dignity, once stolen, must be reclaimed. I glanced at Lily. Her eyes darted away, guilt and fear written across her face. She had chosen silence over confrontation, and that silence cut deeper than Victor's smirk. Still, I could not hate her. I saw the little girl she once was, standing at the library counter, waiting for me to finish work so we could walk home together. She was frightened now, but fear is not the same as betrayal. Fear can be overcome. The hall erupted in applause as the musicians struck their first notes, but their harmony felt like noise pressing against my skull. I excused myself, stepping out onto the balcony. The night air was cool, carrying the scent of salt from the sea. I closed my eyes, breathing slowly, the silver key still warm in my palm. Victor wanted my absence. Very well, he would receive it, but not in the way he imagined. That night, I decided something vital. If my presence was an offense to him, then my absence would become his undoing. I would vanish exactly as he asked, but when I disappeared, I would take with me the one thing he valued above all, control over this $7 million villa. The lavish wedding he had built to display his pride would crumble into an empty hall. What I left behind would not be silence, but humiliation. I did not speak these thoughts aloud. I simply slipped the key back into my pocket and walked calmly through the glowing corridors, my face unreadable. But inside, I whispered to Richard, as if he still lingered among the shadows of the villa we had once dreamed of. "They think I am a burden, Richard. They think I can be erased. Tomorrow I will show them what absence truly means. If you are listening now, perhaps you have known moments like this. Times when someone younger, louder, or bolder tries to push you aside as if you no longer matter. Do not believe them. Even the quietest among us carry the power to change the story. I discovered that in the most unexpected way, and what began as an insult became the turning point of my life. So stay with me. This is not just about wealth or property. This is about dignity, family, and the strange justice that arrives when we least expect it. If you've ever been dismissed, overlooked, or told you were irrelevant, you may find something of yourself in my journey. And if you want to see how a smirk before a wedding became the seed of downfall, I invite you to listen until the end. Because when Victor Haldane asked for my absence, he believed he was removing me from his world. Instead, he gave me the key, literally and figuratively, to reclaim my own. And tomorrow, when the sun rose over the villa's marble arches, my quiet disappearance would change everything. The night after Victor's insult, I could not sleep. I lay in the guest room of the villa, staring at the ceiling, the silver key pressed into my palm until its edges left marks on my skin. My thoughts wandered back to the years that had led me here, to the sacrifices Richard and I had made to secure this home, and to the way those sacrifices had been twisted into something Victor dismissed as just a little help. 3 years earlier, when Richard passed away, I faced a mountain of grief. Yet grief had not been the only burden. There were bills, hospital fees, and the gnawing question of how I would keep Lily steady when her world had tilted. She was 31 at the time, heartbroken, vulnerable, and desperate for something solid. Victor arrived with polished shoes and a heavy, ambitious smile, promising to carry her forward. He told her he would take care of her, that their future together would be safe. I wanted to believe him. I remember sitting across a mahogany desk at the bank, my signature scrawled in black ink beside Richard's name that still lingered on old deeds. I sold the cabin Richard and I had loved in the Cascades. I liquidated part of a stock portfolio that had taken us 20 years to build. I even surrendered the payout of his life insurance policy. In total, $1.9 million. Not a gift, not a whim, but a deliberate investment in Lily's home, with my name entered into the records as a co-owner. 40%. I did not cling to the number back then. I thought of it only as a safeguard, a silent promise that my daughter and I would always have a place. Victor had clasped my hands when we first sat together with the real estate attorney. "You'll always have your own room here, Karen," he said smoothly. "This will be a home for all of us." His eyes were bright, his tone earnest. I had wanted to believe him so badly. That night, I slept with a small smile, certain I had secured stability for Lily and honored Richard's memory. But time has a cruel way of peeling away varnish. The promises dulled. My contributions faded into the background of Victor's growing ego. He began to speak of the villa as ours, when he meant only himself and Lily. I became a tolerated presence, reduced to the edges of photographs and the margins of conversations, and now, on the eve of their wedding, his words stripped away any pretense. To him, my $1.9 million had become a footnote, my legal rights forgotten, my dignity disposable. I rose from the bed and padded across the room, pulling open the drawer of the nightstand. Inside lay a photo of Richard, framed in simple walnut. He was smiling, a fishing rod in his hand, the lake behind him shimmering with light. "Did we sacrifice all this for nothing?" I whispered. The silence answered, heavy and unkind. The next morning, the villa buzzed with preparations. Staff carried boxes of wine, florists arranged roses along the staircase, chefs barked orders in the kitchen. I moved quietly through the house, unnoticed, as though I had already been erased. From the living room, I heard Victor boasting about the guest list, senators, CEOs, the kind of names that made the papers. I paused in the hallway just long enough to catch his words. "This place represents my success. Everything here is ours now, Lily and me. Ours." as if the checks I had written, the assets I had liquidated, the debts I had guaranteed, were figments of my imagination. I wanted to step in, to shout that without me, the marble floors beneath his feet would never have been laid. But I swallowed the words. They were not ready to hear them, not yet. Instead, I retreated to my room and spread papers across the bed, copies of wire transfers, mortgage documents, and the deed bearing my name. Proof. I traced my finger over the line that listed me as a 40% co-owner. They could sneer, they could mock, but the ink did not lie. By evening, the sky outside the villa turned crimson, the sunset painting the horizon with streaks of fire. I sat by the window, clutching Richard's photograph. Memories washed over me, the night we first dreamed of owning a house big enough for family gatherings, the way he insisted we save every dollar for Lily's future. He had trusted me to protect her. That trust now weighed on me like a vow. As the staff rehearsed for tomorrow's grand event, Victor's laughter echoed up the staircase. It grated against my nerves, smug and careless. I knew then that he had never seen me as a partner in this home. To him, I was only a placeholder until he could push me out. But he had miscalculated. The debt he dismissed as trivial was, in truth, the foundation of everything he cherished. And debts, no matter how much time passes, always come due. That night, I slipped the silver key onto a chain and wore it around my neck. I looked at myself in the mirror. Lines deepened on my face, hair streaked with gray, but my eyes were sharp, clear. I whispered aloud, steady and certain, "You think I have given you a gift, but what I gave was an investment, and investments demand return." Tomorrow, when Victor stood before his guests, proud and preening, he would not yet realize that his empire balanced on my silence, and silence, once broken, can shake the world. I woke before dawn, the villa still draped in quiet. For a moment I lay in the dark, listening to the ocean's steady rhythm beyond the balcony. The house was filled with bustle the night before, but now it felt strangely hollow, as if it knew something was about to change. I rose slowly, careful not to wake the staff resting down the hall, and sat on the edge of the bed. The silver key rested cool against my chest, its weight a reminder that I was not as powerless as Victor believed. When I opened the door, I found Lily in the corridor, her eyes rimmed red. She looked as though she hadn't slept either. "Mom," she whispered, twisting her hands together, Maybe you should stay at a hotel for a few days, just until after the ceremony. It would make things easier." Her voice cracked on the last word. I wanted to reach for her, to pull her into an embrace, but she stepped back before I could. Her fear was palpable. She wasn't choosing sides, not yet. She was trying to survive. I nodded, though the words sliced through me. "Of course," I said softly, "if it makes you comfortable." Behind her, faint laughter carried from the study. Victor's voice was low but smug, weaving through the walls. "We'll have the wine cellar installed next month," he said to one of his groomsmen. "That guest room will be perfect for the racks once she's out of here." My chest tightened. They were already speaking of my room, the one where Richard's photograph still sat on the nightstand, as though it were nothing more than space to be repurposed. A wine cellar. That was all my presence meant to Victor. Square footage. I closed the door gently, retreating into my room before the anger spilled out. I walked straight to the dresser, pulled open drawers, and began to fold my clothes into a suitcase. Each shirt, each scarf, each book I tucked away carried the weight of years spent in this house. Every sound seemed louder than it should, the rasp of a zipper, the snap of a latch, as though the walls themselves were listening. When I reached for the photograph of Richard, I paused. His smile, caught mid-laugh beside the lake, met my eyes. I held the frame against my chest and whispered, "I won't let them erase us, Richard. Not like this." My voice trembled, but my resolve did not. I sat on the edge of the bed with the frame in one hand and the key in the other. The silver gleamed in the dim light, cold and steady. I turned it over and over, the way I once did when Richard first pressed it into my palm. Back then, it had felt like a token of trust. Now it felt like a weapon, not of violence, but of truth. I thought of Victor's smirk, of Lily's silence, of Julia's polite distance, and of the villa itself, standing grand and heavy on a foundation partly built with my sacrifices. They believed I would walk away quietly, that age and grief had made me pliable. They thought they could shuffle me aside like old furniture, irrelevant and unwanted, but grief had sharpened me, and humiliation had taught me patience. As the sun broke the horizon, its light slipped through the curtains and cast a silver line across the floor. I stood, shoulders straight, and slipped the photograph into my bag. The suitcase clicked shut. I exhaled, steady, certain. This was not a retreat. This was a decision. If they wanted me gone, then I would go, but I would not go empty-handed. Outside my door, the villa stirred awake. Staff footsteps padded across marble floors. Someone hummed while arranging flowers, and in the kitchen, the clang of pans announced the start of the day's preparations. All of it was meant to build Victor's triumph, but beneath it, I heard something else. Fragility, a foundation that could be undone with a single move. I lifted the suitcase and set it by the door. My hand brushed the silver key again. My reflection in the mirror showed a woman lined by age, yes, but also steeled by clarity. The kind of clarity that comes only when someone underestimates you one time too many. I whispered to Richard once more before leaving the room. "You always said I was stronger than I believed. You were right. Watch me now." The door clicked shut behind me, soft and final. In that sound, I felt the first true step toward what lay ahead. I was no longer the widow they pitied or the guest they tolerated. I was the co-owner of this house, the keeper of a promise, and the woman who would not leave quietly. I walked down the grand staircase, every step echoing like a drumbeat, and passed beneath the glittering chandeliers. No one looked up. They were too busy preparing for tomorrow's spectacle. I allowed myself a faint smile. Let them decorate. Let them boast. By the time the ceremony arrived, they would discover what it meant when a woman like me chose not to go quietly, but with purpose. And in that silence, my plan began to take form. I left the villa before the sun had fully risen, suitcase in the trunk of my car and the silver key hanging cold against my chest. The coastal road curved like a ribbon beside the sea, waves slamming against the rocks below. The beauty of it all felt cruel, like the world had no idea of the insult that had been carved into me the night before. I drove without music, without distraction, letting the engine hum steady while my mind replayed Victor's smirk over and over until it hardened into resolve. By the time I reached the small hotel on the waterfront, my plan had begun to sharpen. I checked in with a polite smile, signed my name with a firm stroke, and carried my bag upstairs. The room smelled of salt and clean linen, the kind of place no one would think to look for me. I set the suitcase down, opened the curtains, and watched the sun blaze gold across the water. For the first time in hours, I allowed myself to breathe. Still, I knew I could not fight this battle on emotion alone. I needed proof, clarity, and someone who understood the language Victor believed he owned, law. My hands trembled only once as I picked up the phone from the nightstand and dialed a number I had not called in years. "Miriam Clark," came the voice on the other end. Strong, clipped, still carrying that no-nonsense tone I remembered from the days when she and Richard volunteered together at legal aid clinics. "Miriam, it's Karen Whitmore," I said quietly. There was a pause, then warmth spread through her words. "Karen, it's been too long. How are you holding up?" I swallowed. "Not well, but I think I finally know what to do." I told her everything. The smirk, the words Victor had spoken, the years of quiet erasure, the 1.9 million I had poured into the villa. I described the guest room he wanted to turn into a wine cellar, the way my daughter could not even look me in the eye, the laughter that filled the house while I folded my clothes alone. Miriam listened without interruption. When I finished, there was silence on the line, broken only by the sound of papers shuffling. Finally, she said, "Karen, do you have copies of the deed, mortgage records?" "Yes," I replied, "every last page. I kept them." "Good," she said firmly, "because I remember those papers too. Richard insisted on fairness when you all bought that property. You are a co-owner, Karen, 40%. That is not kindness, not charity. That is legal fact. And if Victor thinks he can erase you, he's in for a rude awakening." My hand clenched around the phone. For a moment I couldn't speak. Relief and fury tangled in my chest, rising together like a tide. "So it's true," I whispered. "I am not a guest there. I am not at his mercy." "You never were," Miriam said. "But sometimes it takes a push to remember your own power. Do you want my help?" I almost laughed. I wouldn't have called otherwise. "Then here's what we'll do," she continued. "First, bring me every document you have. Bank transfers, canceled checks, the deed itself. We'll build a file thicker than his arrogance. Once we've secured the record, we can take action. Eli's pendens. Maybe even a temporary restraining order if he tries to move against you. He'll think twice before smirking again." The words sank into me like sunlight into cold skin. Lis pendens, restraining order. Terms that might have sounded intimidating to some, but to me they felt like anchors, steadying me against the storm Victor thought I couldn't withstand. "Thank you," I said, and my voice cracked despite my effort to keep it steady. "You don't have to thank me," Miriam replied gently. "You just have to be ready. This will not be easy. He will fight dirty, but you've got more on your side than he does. You've got truth. And you've got me." After the call ended, I sat on the edge of the bed, the phone still warm in my hand. Outside, gulls screamed above the crashing waves. I set the phone down, opened my folder of documents, and began arranging them in neat stacks. Each page told a story. The cabin sold, the stock dissolved, the insurance policy cashed, the check deposited. Proof that I had not only invested, but had been integral to building the life Victor now flaunted. For the first time since Richard's death, I felt his presence not as grief, but as strength. He had trusted Miriam. He had trusted me. Together, we had secured Lily's future. Victor's arrogance had blinded him to the truth, but I would no longer allow him to blind me. I pressed the silver key flat against the deed, aligning metal with paper, promise with proof. My reflection in the window showed an older woman, but behind her eyes there was something fierce, something unyielding. Victor wanted my absence. He would get it. But he would also discover that absence can be louder than presence, more powerful than words, more devastating than confrontation. Because absence, when chosen, leaves a mark no smirk can erase. And with Miriam by my side, that mark would not just be emotional, it would be written into the law itself. The decision to leave the villa was not made in haste, but with the precision of someone who had endured humiliation long enough to measure every step. That evening, while the household buzzed with preparations for the reception, I moved silently through the halls one final time. The chandeliers burned bright, the staff polished glasses that would never be raised, and the air smelled of roses and roasted meats, yet all of it felt hollow, as if it were staged for an audience that would never arrive. I climbed the staircase to my room and pulled my suitcase from beneath the bed. This time, I did not fold clothes with trembling hands. I packed with purpose. A few dresses, the photograph of Richard, my folders of documents, and most importantly, the silver key resting against my chest. Each item slipped into place as though part of a ritual. When the zipper closed, I felt no sorrow, only resolve. Before leaving, I walked once more through the corridors. In the grand living room, I paused to look at the reception contract lying neatly on the console table. I had seen the numbers before. $180,000 for a single night of extravagance. The ink was still fresh, the hotel's crest embossed on the header. With steady hands, I lifted the contract and folded it into my bag. The night air outside was cool, carrying the faint roar of the ocean. My heels clicked against the marble steps as I descended into the courtyard, but no one noticed. Everyone was too busy stringing fairy lights and arranging bouquets. I slipped into my car as though I were nothing more than another worker, vanishing into the night. The drive to the coastal hotel was short. The same hotel listed on the contract, the one Victor had paraded as the pinnacle of luxury to impress his guests. I parked beneath its glowing awning, walked through the revolving doors, and approached the manager with calm authority. "I need to speak to you about a cancellation," I said, sliding the contract across the counter. His brows lifted as he scanned the details, then lifted higher when I laid down my identification. "My name is Karen Whitmore," I continued, my voice steady. "I am a co-owner of the villa where this reception was booked, and I am exercising my right to withdraw consent for this event." The manager hesitated, glancing at me as though waiting for me to falter. I did not. Instead, I produced copies of the deed Miriam had reminded me of, my name clearly printed. His hesitation melted into compliance. Within minutes, the contract was voided, the reservation canceled, and the hotel assured me of confirmation paperwork. I signed the cancellation with deliberate strokes, each letter a quiet reclamation of power. The manager attempted polite conversation, but I answered only with measured nods. My focus was not on him, but on the image of Victor's face when he discovered his grand reception had evaporated overnight. By the time I returned to my room, fatigue tugged at me. Yet it was not the heaviness of defeat. It was the weariness of someone who had carried a burden too long and had finally set it down. I ordered room service. Salmon, potatoes, a glass of white wine, and ate slowly by the window overlooking the ocean. The waves churned under the moonlight, restless and unyielding, mirroring the quiet storm within me. When the tray was cleared, I spread the cancellation contract on the table beside my dinner plate. The silver key lay next to it, gleaming faintly in the lamplight. Side by side, they told a story, a house I still owned and a wedding I had quietly dismantled. I thought of Richard then, of how he had always admired quiet strength. He never raised his voice to win an argument. He simply let the truth sit in the room until it could not be denied. That was what I had done tonight. No shouting, no scenes, no confrontation, just a single action that would echo louder than any insult Victor could devise. As midnight neared, I drew the curtains and lay down in the crisp hotel bed. My body ached, but my mind was calm. Tomorrow would bring chaos, phone calls, accusations, outrage, but tonight I allowed myself one moment of peace. My absence had begun, just as Victor demanded. Only it was not the absence of weakness, but the absence of tolerance. I closed my eyes with the key still in my hand, whispering to the darkness, "This is only the beginning." The phone rang just after 1 a.m. I had been drifting in that space between sleep and waking, the ocean outside pounding against the rocks, when the vibration rattled across the nightstand. I didn't need to check the screen to know who it was. Only Victor carried the kind of arrogance that would reach for me at such an hour, certain I would answer. I let it ring twice before I picked up. "Where are you?" His voice cracked like a whip, sharp and desperate. In the background, I heard muffled chaos, the shrill tone of Lily crying, the shuffle of people moving through the villa. "I'm exactly where you asked me to be," I said evenly, my voice calm as still water. "Absent. Don't play games, Karen," he snapped. 200 guests are coming tomorrow. The governor, 3 CEOs, half the state's social elite. Do you have any idea what this means for me? For us? For you, I corrected, resting back against the pillows. It means embarrassment. For me, it means peace. You said the perfect gift would be my absence, and I've given you exactly that. Be grateful. There was a pause, as if he could not decide whether to shout or to beg. Then came the clatter of something crashing in the background, followed by Lily's voice breaking through, trembling. "Mom, please, please, where are you? We can't fix this without you." Her words pierced me, but I did not let them sway me. Fix what, darling? The flowers, the catering, or the fact that you and your husband have lived in a house built on money you now pretend never existed? Victor cursed under his breath, then forced his voice into something smoother. Look, maybe I was out of line last night. I didn't mean— Oh, you meant every word, I interrupted. And words have consequences. So do contracts. Did you enjoy reading the notice from the hotel? $180,000 gone just like that. Consider it a refund on my wasted kindness. The silence on the other end was thick. I imagined Victor gripping the phone so tightly his knuckles whitened, Lily clutching his arm, torn between loyalty and shame. I almost pitied them. Almost. "You can't do this," he finally said, his voice strained. "You'll ruin us." "No, Victor," I replied. "I'm simply removing myself as you requested. If ruin follows, it is only because you mistook generosity for weakness." Lily's sobs filled the line again. "Mom, please come back. Just until after the wedding, please. We can talk about the money later." Her desperation clawed at me, but I knew better than to cave. "Later never comes, Lily. I've waited 3 years for you to see the truth, and all you've given me is silence. This is not about a wedding. It's about respect, and if you cannot offer it, then you cannot expect my presence." Victor's composure finally cracked. "Do you know what people will say if the mother of the bride doesn't attend? Do you realize what kind of humiliation that is?" I closed my eyes, let the sound of the waves steady me, and answered with a hint of dry laughter. "Yes, Victor, that's the point." The line went dead for a moment, then another call buzzed through within seconds. This time, I silenced the phone and set it face down. Their panic was a symphony I had waited far too long to hear, but I would not let it become the lullaby that carried me into guilt. Instead, I rose from the bed, walked to the balcony, and let the salty wind brush against my face. Below, the ocean foamed and roared, endless and indifferent. My absence had already begun to spread its ripple, and the storm gathering back at the villa was only the beginning. I thought of Richard then, of how he would have smiled at the irony. He used to tell me that arrogance always collapses under its own weight. "Just wait, Karen," he'd say, sipping his coffee at the kitchen table. "Give a fool enough rope and he'll hang himself without you ever lifting a hand." Tonight, Victor had tied the knot with his own words, and all I had done was step aside. The phone buzzed again, then again, until finally the notification stopped. Silence settled over the room once more. I returned inside, set the silver key gently on the table, and poured myself a glass of water. My reflection in the window showed calm eyes, not the frantic glare Victor expected. That calm was my greatest weapon. Tomorrow, the world would see what absence could do. Not a tantrum, not a scene, just a chair left empty, a reception hall without the promised glow, a daughter in tears, a groom stripped of his stage. Their panic tonight was merely the overture. The real performance had yet to begin. I placed the key beside the glass and whispered to the night, "Sleep well, Victor. Tomorrow you'll learn what it feels like to be invisible." And with that, I turned off the lights, climbed back into bed, and let the waves sing me into a rest I had earned. The next morning, sunlight spilled across the hotel room like nothing in the world had changed. But the truth was, everything had. My phone, silent now after a night of unanswered calls, finally lit up with a stream of frantic messages. I ignored most of them until one caught my eye. A simple line from Lily. "Please talk to us. We need to understand." For a moment, I almost softened. But then I thought of the years I had carried them, of every bill paid, every emergency covered, every quiet sacrifice swallowed whole and never acknowledged. Understanding was what I had begged for in silence, but silence was all I ever received. Still, I called back. Victor answered before the first ring had finished. "Finally," he said, his voice tight, the mask of confidence already fraying. "We need to discuss this rationally." "I agree," I replied. "Let's discuss numbers." There was a pause, then a scoff. "Numbers?" "Yes, numbers," I said calmly, opening the folder I had laid out on the desk. Pages rustled beneath my fingers, each one a reminder of what they owed. "In the past 3 years, I have contributed over $420,000 to your household. Do you know what that looks like in writing, Victor? Shall I read it out?" I didn't wait for him to answer. $16,000 for utilities and maintenance, $32,000 for vacations, the cruise you insisted on, the Aspen ski trip, $24,000 for Lily's car repairs and insurance, $45,000 in credit card debt I paid off to protect your so-called reputation. Shall I continue? On the other end, I heard only Lily's muffled gasp. Victor muttered, "This is not the time." "No, this is exactly the time," I cut in, my voice firm but measured, because while you pranced around that villa as though it were your personal kingdom, every brick, every candlelit dinner, every designer suit was, in truth, subsidized by me. You wanted my absence, Victor? Then you'll feel the weight of it now, down to the last cent. Silence pressed against the line, heavy and uncomfortable. I imagined Victor pacing, jaw clenched, calculating how much of his empire had been propped up by the woman he tried to erase. Finally, Lily spoke, her voice breaking. "Mom, I didn't know it was that much." I closed my eyes, steadying myself. "You didn't want to know, sweetheart. That's the difference. You wanted to believe the life you had was effortless, but it wasn't. It was bought, piece by piece, by me, and I never asked for thanks. I asked only for respect." Victor snapped then, his composure shattering. "You think money gives you the right to control us? To humiliate us like this?" I laughed softly, not out of cruelty but of disbelief. "Control? Victor, you've mistaken the nature of generosity. I gave so you could build a life with my daughter. I gave so Richard's legacy would live on. And what did you give in return? A smirk and a dismissal. Do not speak to me about humiliation when you've built your image on my sacrifice." His breathing was ragged now. "If you want repayment, fine. I'll find a way." "Oh, you will," I said quietly, "but not on your terms, on mine." Lily began to cry, words tumbling out between sobs. "Mom, please stop. I can't. This is too much." I softened then, if only for her. "I know, Lily, I know it's overwhelming, but pretending it isn't real won't protect you anymore. The numbers don't lie, and the numbers say this life you're clinging to is unsustainable without me." She whispered, almost to herself, "Then what happens now?" "Now," I said, "I stop carrying what isn't mine, and you start seeing who Victor really is when the safety net disappears." I ended the call before they could reply. My hands shook, but not from fear, from release. Years of quiet giving, of letting my contributions be dismissed, had condensed into this single moment of truth. I had finally forced them to see it, to hear it, to confront the arithmetic of their own ingratitude. I gathered the papers into a neat stack and slid them back into the folder. The key glinted in the sunlight, a reminder that my investment had not vanished. It was tangible, undeniable, written into the very foundation of that house. For the rest of the morning, I walked along the shore outside the hotel. Children played in the surf. Couples strolled hand in hand. Life carried on as if the world hadn't shifted overnight. I breathed in the salt air and let the waves wash against my ankles. The numbers were no longer just figures on a page. They were the evidence of a truth I had hidden too long. Victor thought words could erase me. But numbers do not bend to arrogance. They stand unflinching, a ledger of reality. And now, that ledger was my weapon. I whispered to the wind, steady and certain, "You wanted absence, Victor, but you forgot that absence leaves behind a bill." The knock on my hotel door came just as I was finishing a late breakfast. I opened it to find a man in plain clothes, badge clipped to his belt, his expression polite but firm. "Mrs. Whitmore? Detective Alvarez, Portland PD, I'd like a word." I stepped aside, motioning him in. His eyes swept the room quickly. The neatly made bed, the stack of documents on the desk, the silver key glinting in the morning light. "I'm here because we received a report of possible elder abuse," he said. "Concerns about your mental state and whether you're being coerced or manipulated." The words hit me like a cold gust. "And who," I asked evenly, "filed this report?" He didn't answer directly, but his pause was long enough to confirm what I already knew. Victor. I exhaled slowly, controlling the spark of anger rising in my chest. "Please," I said, motioning to the chair at the small table. "Sit. I'll make this simple." Alvarez opened a small notebook. "I'll need to ask you a few questions. Your health, your finances, whether anyone has pressured you into decisions you don't understand." "My health?" I repeated, almost amused. "I walk 2 miles every morning, Detective. I read without glasses, and I can still beat most people half my age at Scrabble." I reached for the folder of documents and placed it squarely on the table. "As for finances, I think these might help." He leaned forward as I opened the file. One by one, I slid papers across the table. The deed with my name printed in bold, the mortgage documents bearing my signature, copies of wire transfers, checks from the cabin sale, the insurance payout. 40% ownership of the villa, I said clearly. 1.9 million invested. 3 years of expenses, utilities, vacations, credit card debts, paid directly by me. Does that sound like the profile of a confused woman? His brows lifted slightly as he scanned the pages. "You've kept thorough records." "Of course I have," I replied, "because when a man like Victor Haldane tells you your absence is the perfect gift, you learn to prepare for the games he'll play." Alvarez looked up, studying me. There was no pity in his eyes, only calculation. He was weighing truth against manipulation, evidence against allegation. "Mrs. Whitmore," he said finally, "do you believe your son-in-law filed this claim to discredit you?" "I don't believe," I answered firmly. "I know. He fears exposure. He fears the world seeing that his fortune is built not on his own merit, but on the sacrifices of others. And when arrogance fears, it lashes out." He nodded slowly, setting the papers back in a neat stack. "I've seen families use accusations like this before. Sometimes it works. Often it backfires." "This time," I said, "it will backfire." He closed his notebook, his tone shifting from official to almost personal. "Mrs. Whitmore, from what I see here, you're perfectly capable of managing your affairs. These documents speak loudly. If your son-in-law continues with this line, it may raise more suspicion about him than about you." Relief stirred in me, subtle but undeniable. "Thank you, Detective. That's all I needed to hear." He stood, tucking his notebook away. "I'll be filing my report. You'll want to keep close contact with your lawyer." "I already am," I said with a small smile. "Miriam Clark is expecting my call this afternoon." At the mention of her name, he gave a faint nod, as though reassured. "Then you're in good hands." After he left, I sat back in the chair, staring at the stack of papers that had just protected me. Victor thought he could smear my name, paint me as senile, discredit my actions before they gained momentum. He underestimated me again. He forgot that preparation is a shield sharper than any insult. I dialed Miriam immediately, recounting the visit in crisp detail. She chuckled, low and certain. "Let him keep pushing, Karen. Every false move makes our case stronger. Elder abuse accusations are serious. If he wants to play that card, he'll regret it once the truth is documented." I could almost feel it, I admitted. The detective wanted to believe him at first, but paper doesn't lie. "Exactly," Miriam said. "Keep everything organized. If they want war, we'll give them law." After I hung up, I walked out onto the balcony, the ocean stretching infinite and blue. A gull soared overhead, its cry sharp against the wind. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like the one being watched or judged. Instead, I felt like the one who had just shifted the ground beneath another's feet. Victor had tried to silence me with humiliation, then erase me with suspicion. But humiliation had sparked resolve, and suspicion had delivered vindication. Each move he made drew him deeper into the trap of his own arrogance. I ran my fingers over the silver key hanging at my chest and whispered to Richard's memory, "He thinks I'm fading. But you know better. You always knew better." The waves below thundered in agreement, steady, relentless. My absence had already begun to roar louder than Victor's presence ever could. The following afternoon, I walked into Miriam's office with the steadiness of someone who had nothing left to lose and everything left to prove. The space smelled faintly of leather and ink, the kind of scent that spoke of decades of cases won and lost. Sunlight streamed across shelves lined with heavy books, their spines gleaming with gold letters. Contracts, property law, civil disputes. It was a room built for truth, to stand taller than pride. Miriam stood from behind her desk, her gray hair swept back in a no-nonsense knot, eyes sharp but warm. "Karen," she greeted me, "are you ready?" "I've been ready since the night he smirked at me," I replied, placing my folder on her desk. She opened it, flipping through the pages once more. The deed with my name, the mortgage contracts, the record of every dollar I'd poured into that villa. She tapped the top page and looked at me. "This is more than enough. Let's make it clear to him today." Moments later, the door opened, and Victor and Lily walked in. He strode forward with the arrogance of a man who still believed appearances could bend reality, his expensive watch glinting under the lights. Lily trailed behind, pale and tense, her hands twisting in front of her as though she wished she could fold herself out of sight. Victor didn't sit until Miriam gestured, but when he did, he leaned back as if the chair belonged to him. "I hope this won't take long," he said briskly. "We've had enough theatrics." Miriam's gaze was icy. "This isn't theater, Mr. Haldane. This is fact." She spread the documents across the table, each page sliding toward him, like a card in a high-stakes game. "Karen Whitmore is a 40% owner of your villa. Every cent is documented, every transfer accounted for. She has the right to occupy, to control, and if necessary, to force sale. You are not in sole command." Victor snorted, though the sound faltered when his eyes scanned the bold lines of text. "This doesn't mean what you think it does," he said quickly. "It was a family arrangement. Nothing more." "Family arrangements don't get recorded on deeds," Miriam shot back, "and signatures don't appear by magic. If you continue to deny her rights, we will file a lis pendens first thing Monday morning. That means you won't be able to sell, refinance, or even pretend to mortgage that property without the court's permission. Do you understand?" The words hit him like a slap. He tried to mask it, shifting in his chair, but I saw the flicker in his eyes, the crack in his armor. He opened his mouth, but I spoke before he could. "Victor," I said, my voice calm, almost gentle. "You told me my absence would be a gift. I gave it to you. But what you forgot is that absence doesn't erase ownership. This house is not yours alone. It never was. And if you don't come to terms with that, the law will remind you. Lily looked at me then, her eyes swimming with conflict. She opened her mouth, but Victor silenced her with a sharp glance. "And what exactly do you want?" he asked, his voice clipped. Miriam slid another sheet across the table. "Buy her out, 2.8 million fair market value for her share, or agree to put the villa up for sale and divide the proceeds according to the deed." His jaw tightened, the muscles twitching. "That's extortion. That's ownership," Miriam replied coldly. The silence stretched until it felt heavy enough to crush us all. Finally, Victor shoved the papers back with a dramatic sweep. "You're bluffing. You wouldn't dare take this to court. Do you know what that would look like? A mother dragging her daughter through litigation?" I leaned forward then, slowly removing the silver key from around my neck. The light caught it, sending a glimmer across the table. I set it down on the documents, the soft click ringing louder than any shout. "I'm not bluffing," I said quietly. "This key isn't just metal. It's a reminder that I built part of that house, that I belong in its story, whether you like it or not. If you force me to, I will walk into that courtroom, and I will let the world watch you explain why you tried to erase a widow who kept your roof from collapsing. And when they see the truth, it won't be my reputation that crumbles. It will be yours." For once, Victor had no quick reply. His lips pressed into a thin line, his eyes darting to Lily as though searching for support. But she only looked down, tears brimming, caught between the man she married and the mother who had raised her. Miriam closed the folder with finality. "You have a choice, Mr. Haldane. Pay what you owe, or prepare to face a judge. Either way, Karen wins." The room fell into silence. The sound of the ocean outside the window was faint but steady, like the rhythm of truth that could not be ignored. I lifted the key back into my hand, slipped it around my neck, and met Victor's gaze with calm certainty. "You wanted me gone," I said softly, "but it's you who will be forced to leave." 2 days after the meeting in Miriam's office, I sat in the small cafe across from the courthouse, stirring a cup of coffee gone lukewarm. The silver key rested against my collarbone, its weight grounding me as I replayed Victor's glare, the way he had clenched his jaw when confronted with the documents. I expected more fire, more bluster from him afterward, but instead there had been silence. That silence unsettled me more than his insults ever could. Silence from a man like Victor meant he was plotting. I was right. "Karen." I looked up to see Julia Haldane, Victor's mother, standing at my table. She looked smaller than I remembered, her frame wrapped in an elegant but slightly dated coat, her face painted with the kind of careful dignity that money could buy, but regret could not disguise. I hadn't spoken more than a handful of words to her in years. She had always kept her distance, never openly cruel, but never welcoming either. Now, her eyes carried a heaviness that was hard to ignore. "May I sit?" she asked. I gestured to the chair. She lowered herself slowly, folding her gloved hands in her lap. For a long moment she didn't speak. Finally she said, "I heard about the meeting." I raised an eyebrow. "From Victor?" Her lips pressed thin. "From Lily. She was in tears. She doesn't know where to stand." I softened slightly at the mention of my daughter. She shouldn't have to stand anywhere but with her own conscience. Julia nodded faintly, as though the words cut her more than she expected. She reached into her purse and slid a small envelope across the table. "You need to see this." I hesitated, then opened it. Inside were copies of property records, signed contracts, and emails. My breath caught as I scanned them. The villa, my villa, had been listed through a shell company, ready to be transferred quietly without my consent. "He's been planning this for months," Julia said, her voice low. "He thought if he pushed you out emotionally, you would never notice the legal maneuver. By the time you did, it would be too late." The papers shook in my hands. "Why show me this?" I asked. "You've stood by him until now." Julia's eyes glistened, the mask of composure finally cracking. "Because I made him this way." She inhaled sharply. "When his father left, I spoiled him. I told myself I was protecting him, but all I did was feed his arrogance. I taught him he was untouchable, and now I see the monster that indulgence created." Her voice wavered, but she pressed on. "Karen, I cannot undo what I've done, but I will not watch him destroy you, or Lily, not anymore." I studied her for a long moment. This was the woman who had once looked through me at family gatherings as if I were invisible. The woman who had treated me as an intrusion into her son's grand future. Yet here, she sat confessing, offering me the weapon Victor thought he had hidden. "Why now?" I asked quietly. "Because," she said, "when I saw the contract he drew up, I realized he would sell that house from under both of you and pocket the money. He'd leave Lily with nothing. And I couldn't carry that on my conscience." The cafe was noisy with clinking cups and murmured conversations, but around us it felt utterly still. I folded the papers back into the envelope and slipped it into my bag. "You know this won't just be a family squabble once it's out in the open," I said. "This will be public, messy, brutal." Julia nodded. "Let it be. Sometimes the only way to cleanse rot is to expose it to the air." For the first time, I saw not a haughty matriarch, but a mother with regret etched into her bones, a mother who had lost her way, just as I had nearly lost mine. "Thank you," I said softly. She looked away, blinking quickly, then stood. "Do what you must. And Karen—" Her voice caught, but she steadied it. "When you win, don't gloat. Remember that I loved him once, even if I created this mess." I nodded, understanding more than I expected. When she left, I sat in silence, my coffee cold, the silver key warm against my chest. For years, Julia had been part of the wall Victor used to isolate me. Now she had placed a crack in that wall herself. Perhaps it was guilt, perhaps it was redemption, but it was also an opening. That night I called Miriam. Her voice sharpened when I described the documents. "This changes everything," she said. "We can stop him before he makes a single move. By the time he realizes what's happened, the court will already have its hand on the villa." As I hung up, I stood by the hotel window, watching the lights of the city flicker against the dark sea. Victor believed he had cornered me, but he never expected his own mother to turn the board against him. I touched the key at my chest and whispered to Richard's memory, "It seems even his mother has grown tired of his games." And for the first time in weeks, I felt something almost like hope. I didn't need to be at the villa to know what was happening. The news traveled faster than whispers in a church pew. By noon, the scandal had slipped into the headlines of local papers, then bloomed across social media. "Lavish wedding canceled at Seaside Villa," one headline screamed. 200 guests left without reception. Photographs followed, white roses stacked by the dumpsters, gold-embossed napkins with the couple's initials abandoned on marble floors, and a hall so empty it looked like a mausoleum for pride. I sat in my hotel room, the television humming. A local station replayed shaky cell phone footage taken by a guest. Lily in her gown, her veil slipping as she wept into her hands. Victor at her side, face red, barking into his phone while staff hovered awkwardly. The anchor's voice was almost gleeful. The bride's mother, notably absent, was said to have played a role in the sudden cancellation. I took a sip of tea and let the bitterness rest on my tongue. They wanted my absence. Now it had become the main character. The footage cut to the guests leaving, their designer shoes clicking against the stone steps, their expressions a mix of annoyance and thinly veiled delight at the gossip they'd carry home. One woman dabbed her lipstick and told a reporter, "It was supposed to be the event of the season. Instead, it's the scandal of the year." I imagined Victor grinding his teeth as the narrative slipped from his control. He thrived on appearances, on curating an image of success and power. And now, his empire of glass had shattered in full view of the very people he wanted to impress. The camera zoomed in on the abandoned banquet tables, rows of untouched crystal glasses reflecting nothing but emptiness. On the floor lay one of the monogram napkins, damp and crumpled, the letters V and L bleeding into each other as though they had dissolved under the weight of disappointment. For a long moment, I stared at that napkin on the screen. It was more than cloth. It was a symbol of money wasted, of promises broken, of illusions collapsing. I could almost hear Richard's voice in my head, calm and wry. They built a house of cards, Karen. You only had to open the window. The phone rang again. This time it was Lily. Her sobs came through before she could form words. Mom, it's ruined. Everything is ruined. I closed my eyes, my heart tugging even as my spine stayed straight. No, sweetheart, not everything. Just the mask. And masks aren't meant to last forever. She hiccuped, unable to answer. Victor's voice thundered in the background, cursing, demanding silence. I waited until I heard the phone clatter. Then Lily whispered quickly, I didn't know he'd go this far. I didn't know he'd try to smear you to lie like this. I'm sorry, Mom. I'm so sorry. Tears stung my eyes, but I blinked them back. You chose silence, Lily, and silence has a cost. But you still have a choice now. You can keep standing in his shadow, or you can step into the light, even if it blinds you at first. Her sobs grew softer. She didn't answer, but I heard the crack in her loyalty, the fracture Victor could no longer repair. When the call ended, I sat in the quiet, the television still looping images of chaos. I could almost feel the humiliation spreading through the villa like smoke, seeping into Victor's lungs until he choked on it. He had mocked me, tried to erase me, but now it was his name on every tongue, his disgrace on every screen. That evening, as the sun dipped into the horizon, I walked down to the shoreline outside the hotel. The sand was cool under my shoes, gulls circling above, waves licking at the rocks with steady rhythm. I let the roar of the sea drown out the echoes of Lily's crying, Victor's rage, the chatter of gossip. For the first time in years, I felt something strange, a bittersweet satisfaction laced with sorrow. It wasn't joy. How could I rejoice at my daughter's heartbreak? It was something colder, quieter, the recognition that justice often looks like devastation before it feels like healing. And humiliation, once unleashed, cannot be gathered back into silence. I stooped to pick up a small shell, its edges worn smooth by the ocean. I held it in my palm beside the silver key, two tokens of endurance, one carved by time, the other forged by promise. Together they reminded me that even in erosion, there is strength. As the sky deepened into dusk, I whispered into the wind, You wanted absence, Victor. Now it follows you like a shadow you cannot shake. The waves answered, relentless, and in their sound I heard the truth. The world had finally seen him as he was. I met Alan Spencer, the banker, in a quiet corner of the branch downtown. He was a man who carried numbers in his eyes the way a priest carries scripture, always calculating, always reverent. His office was tidy, lined with charts and certificates, the faint hum of the printer filling the silence. He greeted me with a handshake, polite but wary, as though he already knew the storm I carried in with me. Mrs. Whitmore, he said gently, I understand you wanted to talk about the Haldane Villa? I nodded and laid the deed on his desk, the silver key catching the light as I shifted. I need to know the truth, Alan, not Victor's version. The truth. He exhaled, steepling his fingers. Then you deserve honesty. The mortgage on the property is behind, 3 months in arrears. Another missed payment and the bank will initiate foreclosure proceedings. The word struck like a bell in a cathedral, clear, final. "So all this grandeur," I said slowly, "the chandeliers, the receptions, the bragging, it's all balancing on debt." Alan nodded. Without consistent income, he's stretched thin. Credit, loans, risky investments. If foreclosure happens, the property is auctioned. But because your name is on the deed, you have every right to intervene before it comes to that. In fact, you could file a notice of pending action to protect your share immediately. I leaned back, the weight of the moment settling into my bones. Victor thought he had me cornered. Instead, he had built his empire on a crumbling foundation, one I had the power to expose. That afternoon, I walked straight into Miriam's office with the documents Alan had given me. She scanned them with a lawyer's practiced eye, her lips curling into a thin smile. "This," she said, tapping the page, "is the lever we needed. With the villa in arrears, you can petition the court for immediate relief. A lis pendens will freeze any attempt to sell or transfer without your consent. And if we secure a temporary restraining order, Victor won't even be able to change the locks." Her words felt like steel being forged in the fire of my humiliation, reshaped into something sharp and unyielding. "Do it," I said simply. The paperwork moved faster than I expected. By evening, Miriam had filed both motions. The court responded with surprising speed, appointing a property manager to oversee the villa. A locksmith arrived under court order. Codes were changed and new keys were issued. One of them was placed directly into my hand. I held it for a long time, running my fingers over the cool edges. The irony was not lost on me. Victor had demanded my absence, yet now the house was mine to control. My disappearance had not been surrender. It had been strategy. Back at the hotel, I placed the new key beside the silver one on the nightstand. 2 keys, 2 symbols, one of memory, one of law. Together they formed the truth of who I was. A widow underestimated, a woman dismissed, but also a co-owner whose absence had just reshaped the battlefield. The phone rang again, Victor's number flashing across the screen. This time I answered. "You think you're clever," he spat, his voice raw. "Changing locks? Bringing lawyers into family business? Do you have any idea what you've done?" "Yes," I said calmly. "I've honored your request. You wanted me gone. I'm gone. And the villa is gone with me." His breath hitched, disbelief twisting into fury. "You can't." "I can," I interrupted, "and I have the court order to prove it. From this moment on, you cannot sell, you cannot borrow, you cannot so much as replace a light bulb without my consent. Consider this your wedding gift." For once, he had no retort. The silence on the line was sweeter than any victory speech. After I ended the call, I stepped onto the balcony. The waves rolled in with relentless rhythm, the night air crisp against my skin. Somewhere back at the villa, guests were whispering, staff were packing up, and Victor was pacing in circles, realizing the trap he had walked into. He had asked for my absence. He had received it. And with it, he had lost control of everything he thought was his. I lifted the new key to the moonlight, whispering to Richard's memory. They thought they pushed me out, but really I just walked out carrying the house on my back. And for the first time in years, I smiled, not in bitterness, but in quiet triumph. The call came from Miriam on a gray morning, the kind where the ocean blurred into the sky and everything seemed washed in silver. Her voice carried the tone of someone who had seen battles end in smoke and wanted me prepared for the next move. "Victor wants to meet," she said. "He's rattled. He'll try to bargain." I tightened my grip on the silver key resting against my chest. "Then let's hear him," I replied. The meeting was arranged at Miriam's office, the same room where the truth of the deed had first shattered Victor's certainty. I arrived early, sitting in the leather chair opposite her desk, sipping lukewarm water while my mind replayed every insult, every dismissal. When the door finally opened, Victor walked in, his suit immaculate but his eyes hollowed by sleepless nights. Lily followed, her shoulders hunched, as if she were carrying both his pride and her own shame. Victor didn't waste time with pleasantries. "This has gone too far," he said, slamming his hand on the table. "You've humiliated us, dragged us into legal battles, ruined Lily's wedding. Enough." Miriam's voice was steady. "You're here to make an offer, Mr. Haldane, not to lecture." He glared at her before turning to me. $2.8 million paid in installments. I'll buy your share out slowly, that's fair." I let his words hang in the air, then shook my head. "Fair?" I repeated softly. "Fair would have been remembering who kept your roof above your head. Fair would have been honoring Richard's sacrifice. Installments from you, Victor, would mean another set of empty promises. No, I won't tether myself to your delays and excuses." His jaw tightened. "Then what do you want?" I leaned forward, folding my hands on the table. "Accountability, immediate repayment, and change." He sneered. "Change? What does that mean?" "It means Lily gets a job. It means you stop spending money you don't have. It means no more hiding behind illusions while others foot the bill. I'm not just buying my freedom, I'm buying hers." Lily's head snapped up, her eyes wide, tears brimming. "Mom," she whispered, her voice breaking. Victor slammed his palm again, his temper slipping. "You can't dictate how we live." I didn't flinch. "Watch me." My tone was calm, the kind of calm that comes from holding every card in the game. "The villa is tied. The court will enforce the sale if you refuse. You will lose more than dignity if you keep fighting. You'll lose everything." For the first time, I saw doubt flicker across his face. He turned to Lily, desperate for support, but she could not meet his eyes. Instead, she clutched the strap of her purse and whispered, "She's right." The silence that followed was thick, suffocating. Miriam broke it with the crisp tap of her pen. "My client has been more than generous. You have two options: settle and meet her terms, or proceed to court where you will face not only financial loss but public exposure." Victor looked back at me, his expression hard but cornered. "So what are these terms?" I slid a sheet of paper across the table. My handwriting was firm, unshaking. "Full repayment within 90 days. Liquidate assets if you must. Lily will provide proof of employment. You will cut your discretionary spending in half. And you will vacate the villa if the court orders its sale. Fail on any count, and we proceed with litigation." His face burned red, veins rising at his temples. "You're cruel." "No," I said softly. "I'm just finished being kind to someone who mistook kindness for weakness." Lily covered her mouth, tears streaming freely now. She looked at me, her voice trembling. "Mom, I'll do it. I'll work. I'll stand with you. Just, please, let's not tear this apart more than it already is." I reached across the table, laying my hand over hers. "I'm not tearing, Lily. I'm stitching. The tear came long ago when respect was cut from this family. All I'm doing now is mending what can still be saved." Victor shoved back his chair, pacing the office like a caged animal. At last he turned, defeated but not humbled. 90 days, he spat. "I'll find the money." "You'd better," I said, slipping the silver key back beneath my collar. "Because this time, Victor, you're not dealing with a mother-in-law. You're dealing with a co-owner who knows her worth." Miriam gathered the papers, her expression one of quiet triumph. "We'll draft the agreement. Any breach will send us straight to court." The meeting ended with Victor storming out, Lily trailing behind, her tears unhidden. I remained seated, my body weary but my spirit steady. I had not just negotiated money, I had negotiated a shift. For the first time, Victor had felt the weight of my absence as a force, not a void. As I stood to leave, Miriam placed a hand on my shoulder. "You handled that with more grace than most warriors do in battle." I smiled faintly. "Grace is sharper than rage, Miriam. Rage burns fast. Grace endures." Outside, the sky had cleared, the ocean glinting blue under the afternoon sun. I walked slowly toward my car, the silver key warm against my chest. 90 days. 90 days to watch Victor squirm, to see if Lily could reclaim herself, and to decide whether the villa would stand or fall. But for the first time, the terms were mine. The day of the hearing arrived with a sharp wind rolling in from the Pacific, rattling the courthouse flag against its pole. I wore a simple navy dress, nothing flashy, nothing to invite commentary. My armor wasn't fabric or jewels. It was the folder of documents in my hand, the truth etched in black ink and signatures that couldn't be erased. The silver key hung under my collar, warm against my skin, as though Richard himself pressed his hand against my heart. Inside, the courtroom was cool and solemn, the benches polished to a sheen. Reporters hovered near the back, their pens and cameras poised. I knew this would not just be a legal decision, it would be a public reckoning. Victor sat at the table across from us, his jaw set, his tie knotted too tightly, as if strangling himself with his own pride. Lily sat beside him, pale, trembling, eyes darting toward me, but never quite meeting mine. Miriam leaned toward me. "Stay calm. The facts speak louder than anything." When the judge entered, everyone rose. The gavel cracked, a sound that cut through every whisper. "This hearing is to determine ownership and authority regarding the Haldane-Whitmore property," the judge said. His tone was even, but his eyes missed nothing. Victor's lawyer was the first to speak. He launched into a rehearsed speech about family generosity, about misunderstandings, about how my contributions had been gifts made out of maternal love. His voice rang with forced conviction, but the words fell flat against the evidence. When it was Miriam's turn, she rose with calm precision. She laid the deed before the judge, then the mortgage records, then the bank transfers. My client, Mrs. Karen Whitmore, invested $1.9 million into this villa. Her name is on the deed as a 40% co-owner. For 3 years, she also covered household expenses totaling over $400,000. This is not generosity. This is ownership, and ownership carries rights that cannot be dismissed with insults or manipulation. Her words carried like stone thrown into water, rippling outward. The judge adjusted his glasses, flipping through the documents. Victor shifted in his seat, sweat shining faintly at his temples. I could feel the eyes of the reporters on me, waiting for a reaction. I kept my face steady, hands folded in my lap. Inside, my pulse thudded. But it was not fear, it was resolve. The judge cleared his throat. "Mr. Haldane, can you present any evidence to contradict these records?" Victor's lawyer hesitated, fumbling through a thin folder. "Your Honor, these transactions were informal. Family support. They were never intended to grant authority." "Yet her name appears on the deed," the judge interrupted. "Are you suggesting the county recorder's office fabricated this entry?" The silence that followed was damning. Finally, the judge set the papers aside and spoke with the gravity of finality. "The court recognizes Mrs. Whitmore as a legal co-owner of the villa. Furthermore, given the arrears in mortgage and evidence of financial mismanagement, this court orders the property be placed under forced sale, with proceeds divided according to the deed, 60% to the Haldanes, 40% to Mrs. Whitmore." The gavel struck. The sound reverberated like thunder through the chamber. Victor froze, his face drained of color. Lily gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. For a heartbeat, the room held its breath. Then the murmur of reporters surged like a tide, pens scratching furiously, cameras flashing. I sat motionless, my hands still folded, but inside I felt something. Release, like a weight sliding off my shoulders after years of silence. The villa was no longer his fortress. It was evidence of his downfall. Miriam leaned close, her smile subtle, but sure. "We did it." I nodded, my eyes never leaving Victor. He turned to me, fury blazing, but it was hollow now, stripped of power. For once, I didn't look away. As we exited the courtroom, the air outside smelled of salt and rain. Reporters swarmed, calling my name, shoving microphones forward. "Mrs. Whitmore, how do you feel about the judgment? Did you plan this all along? What message do you have for your daughter?" I lifted my chin, the silver key glinting as I stepped into the gray daylight. "The message," I said quietly but firmly, "is that respect is not optional. It is owed. And when it's denied, justice will claim it." The cameras flashed again, capturing not just my words, but the steadiness in my eyes. Behind me, Victor shouted something to the reporters, his voice sharp, frantic, but no one listened. For once the spotlight had shifted, and he was only background noise. As I walked down the courthouse steps, I pressed the key against my palm and whispered to Richard's memory, "We held our ground, and we won." The courthouse steps were still buzzing with reporters when Lily broke away from Victor. Her veil, crumpled from the canceled wedding, was stuffed awkwardly into her purse, and her shoes clicked unevenly on the stone as she hurried after me. Her eyes were swollen from tears, her hands trembling as though she had been holding something too heavy for too long. "Mom," she called softly, almost afraid of the word. I stopped, turning slowly. For a moment, the crowd melted away. The journalists, the flashing cameras, even Victor's furious shouts at his lawyer. It was just me and my daughter, standing in the thin sunlight of a day that had already rewritten our lives. She reached me, breathless, clutching a small frame wrapped in tissue paper. Her voice broke as she pressed it into my hands. "I took this from the villa before we left this morning. It's Dad. I didn't want him to sit there alone while all of this happened." I peeled back the tissue, and there he was, Richard smiling by the lake, the fishing rod angled just so. My throat tightened. For all the battles I had fought, for all the armor I had wrapped around myself, this single photograph stripped me bare. Lily's sobs came then, raw and unrestrained. "I was so scared, Mom. Scared to stand up to him. Scared to lose everything. Scared that if I chose you, I'd be betraying him. But the truth is, I was betraying you by staying silent. I'm so sorry." Her words tumbled over each other, desperate, pleading. I saw the girl she had once been, running to me with scraped knees, clinging to my hand during thunderstorms. And I saw the woman she had become, trapped in a cage of fear she had mistaken for love. I set the frame gently on the steps and pulled her into my arms. She shook against me, her tears soaking into my shoulder. My voice was low, steady, the voice I had used to soothe her as a child. "Shh, Lily. You don't have to apologize for being afraid. Fear is human. But choosing silence, that was the wound. And now you've found your voice again." She clutched me tighter, gasping between sobs. "I don't care about the villa, or the money, or the wedding. I just don't want to lose you. I thought I could keep the peace by standing in the middle, but all I did was lose both sides." I pulled back slightly, cupping her face in my hands. Her eyes, red and swollen, searched mine for forgiveness. "You never lost me, Lily. Even when you turned away, I was still here. Because that's what mothers do. We wait, we endure, and we forgive." Her tears flowed harder, but now they carried release, not shame. She pressed her forehead against mine, whispering, "I want to come home to you, Mom. Not the villa, not the life Victor built. Home. Wherever you are, that's where I belong." The crowd around us had begun to thin, but I was dimly aware of the cameras still trained on us. Let them capture this moment. Let the world see that what had been broken could still be mended, even if the scars remained. Behind us, Victor's voice rose in angry protest, shouting at reporters that the judgment was unfair, that I had manipulated the system. but his words sounded hollow against the sight of his wife clinging to her mother, her loyalty shifting like the tide slipping away from shore. I picked up Richard's photograph and pressed it into Lily's hands. "We'll keep him with us, wherever we go," I said softly, not as a reminder of what we lost, but as proof of what we survived. She nodded through her tears, holding the frame as if it were the most fragile treasure in the world. "I'll work, Mom. I'll change. I don't want to live under lies anymore." I kissed her forehead, breathing in the scent of her hair, so familiar, so achingly precious. "We'll figure it out together, one step at a time, you and me. We'll stitch a new life from the ruins of the old." For the first time in years, I felt the distance between us collapse. The wound Victor had exploited, my fear of losing my daughter, was closing, stitched not by victory in court, but by the tears on her cheeks and the honesty in her voice. As we walked away from the courthouse, I slipped my arm around her shoulders. The silver key tapped lightly against Richard's photograph, two symbols colliding, the past we had endured and the future we would now rebuild. I whispered to her, just loud enough for her to hear, "We can lose houses, Lily. We can lose weddings, reputations, even wealth, but we don't lose each other. Not anymore." She nodded, leaning against me, her tears still falling but her steps steady at last. And in that moment, for the first time since Richard's death, I felt like a mother not just surviving, but beginning to heal. It was nearly 6 months later when I finally turned the key in the lock of my new apartment. The building wasn't grand, not like the villa with its marble floors and sweeping staircases, but the air smelled of fresh paint and blooming geraniums on the windowsills. The walls were sunlit, the kind of yellow that made you feel welcomed instead of scrutinized. And outside, just beyond the courtyard, the ocean stretched vast and unyielding, its steady rhythm echoing the heartbeat I had learned to trust again. I set my suitcase down and hung the silver key on a small hook by the door. For the first time, it wasn't a reminder of battles fought or insults endured. It was simply a token of survival, of dignity reclaimed. Above it, I pinned a small photograph of Richard, the one Lily had carried from the villa, his smile steady as ever by the lake. His eyes seemed to twinkle in the afternoon light, as if blessing this new chapter. The villa had sold not long after the court's ruling. When the papers were signed, Victor stormed out of the courthouse, his face white with rage. Lily sat beside me in silence, her hand gripping mine, her tears falling quietly onto the deed as the judge confirmed the sale. 40% of the proceeds transferred directly into my account, nearly $3 million. Enough not just to live, but to begin again without fear. I didn't squander it on grandeur. Instead, I chose this senior community apartment by the sea, a place alive with gardens, laughter, and the quiet hum of people who had learned the art of endurance. On my first evening there, I wandered into the common room where a painting class was underway. The smell of acrylics filled the air, and the teacher, a kind woman with paint-stained fingers, handed me a brush without question. "Just paint what you feel," she said. I dipped the bristles into blue and let the ocean take shape across the canvas. For the first time in years, my hand didn't tremble. Lily visited every week. She had found work at a local bookstore, the same kind of space where I had once spent my life among paper and quiet stories. She arrived in simple dresses now, her hair tied back, her laugh growing freer each time she walked through my door. Sometimes she brought flowers, sometimes a bag of groceries, sometimes nothing but her presence, and each time it was enough. One afternoon, she stood by my window, gazing at the sea. "You know, Mom," she said softly, "he used to tell me that without him, I'd be nothing, that he made me. But he was wrong. You're the one who built me. And now, I want to build myself." I hugged her, feeling the strength in her words. "Then you've already begun." Letters came too. One arrived from Julia, written in a careful script that betrayed her age. She confessed her regret, her role in creating Victor's arrogance, and thanked me for protecting Lily when she could not. I cannot undo the past, she wrote, but I can pray for your peace and for my son's redemption, if he ever seeks it. I placed the letter in a small wooden box beside Richard's photograph, not out of reconciliation, but as a reminder that even flawed hearts can reach for truth. Sometimes, when I walked through the gardens, neighbors would stop to chat. They had seen the news, of course. How could they not? And some whispered that I had lived through a storm they couldn't imagine. But I didn't speak of scandal. I spoke of healing, of new beginnings, of how silence could be a weapon, but also a balm. On the anniversary of the canceled wedding, I invited a few women from my book club to my apartment. We shared tea and laughter, the kind that warmed rather than wounded. At the end of the evening, one of them asked, "Karen, do you regret disappearing that morning?" I thought for a moment, staring at the silver key glinting on its hook. Then I smiled. No, they wanted me gone, so I gave them exactly that. But I didn't leave empty-handed. I took with me not just a villa, not just money, but the reminder that it's never too late to choose dignity. The room fell quiet for a heartbeat. Then one of the women squeezed my hand. "That's a different kind of gift," she said. Later that night, alone again, I stood by the window with the ocean roaring beneath the moonlight. I thought of Victor. His pride collapsed. His empire of appearances crumbled. I thought of Lily, her laughter slowly mending, her steps growing stronger. And I thought of Richard, gone but never absent, woven into every choice I made. They wanted absence, I whispered into the night. But what I found was presence, my own. The waves answered, steady and eternal. I turned from the window, closed the curtains, and let peace settle into the room like a long-awaited guest. For the first time in years, I was not holding my breath. I was simply breathing. And that, more than villas or victories, was the greatest gift of all.